In a shocking turn of events that no one saw coming, Wendy Williams, the queen of hot topics and the person they tried to silence, has finally taken the stand in federal court after decades of rumors, suspicions, and unrelenting industry backlash. Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and is the exact federal courtroom testimony of the Sean Diddy Combs trial, as reported by the Inner City Press. Her testimony isn't just about Diddy, it's about a pattern of protection, silence, and systemic abuse in hip-hop. And when Wendy Williams entered the courtroom, it didn't feel like a celebrity appearance. Rather, it felt like the arrival of someone who had been buried alive and clawed, her way out to finally tell the truth. She brought with her dates, quotes, and chilling memories. This wasn't a tabloid segment. Rather, it was a bombshell deposition under oath, and everyone was listening to what she said about Diddy, Jay-Z, and their twisted connection. It could bring down an entire industry. I was never messy, I was never bitter, I was never lying, and I was early. Wendy wasted no time reminding the court why she was there to testify under oath about the behaviors, threats, cover-ups, and patterns she had long accused Sean Diddy Combs of. She wasn't here for drama, just headlines. For years, the media tried to silence her with lawsuits, threats, blackballing, and mockery, but now all those warnings and rumors she spread on her former radio show were part of a federal investigation, arranging. When I first started talking about Diddy, she said, I wasn't trying to tear him down. I was trying to wake people up. The courtroom watched as she laid out a stack of documents in front of her, printouts of old show transcripts, executive emails, and a timeline of everything that allegedly happened to shut her down. She began in the early 2000s, and everyone knew that he was protected. You couldn't talk about Puff without a phone call coming in an hour later. She described instances where station managers warned her advertisers to withdraw from her show, and threats were made subtly but unmistakable ways. You're doing too much, Wendy. They would say, you're going to get hurt, Wendy. She explained how a girl group, purportedly sent by Diddy himself, literally chased her out of her radio station. I told them they were broke, and within hours, they were waiting for me outside my building. She described her career as if it were a war zone, and every time I revealed anything about Diddy, from his parties to the way he treated his artists, something in my world would fall apart. A sponsor. When the prosecution asked Wendy about the culture surrounding Diddy, she turned to someone else. She had long warned the public about Jay-Z, and her tone sharpened. You can't talk about what Diddy did without talking about the people who stood next to him and smiled with him while the abuse was happening, including Jay-Z. You can blackball me, you can threaten me, but you can't erase me. Now that I'm under oath, I hope they're listening, because I'm not stopping until the truth is loud enough to shut down their machine. Before she leaned in, she asked the jury, remember Foxy Brown? She was 15 years old, Jay-Z was 27, and he was always with her. She pulled out lyrics from Foxy's debut album, which reportedly included the line, ain't no nump like the one I got, no one can me better. The courtroom flinched as she read the words out loud. You tell me. Why was a grown man writing those lyrics for a child? She went on, with details that only someone in the industry could be aware of, including rumors that Jay picked Foxy up from high school, lavish gifts, shopping sprees, and hair appointments sponsored by a man nearly twice her age. This wasn't a label signing. This was grooming. Then Wendy revealed something even more sinister, an alleged tape. For years, there had been a rumor that there was a tape between Jay-Z Fox and Jamie Foxx. You never heard about it again because suddenly Fox's house was broken into, the tape was removed, and she left the words hanging in the air. I don't think it was a coincidence. Shortly after implying that Jay-Z's relationships with underage girls needed to be looked into, Wendy claimed she was fired from her highly rated radio show. They labeled me toxic, but now you're seeing that everything. When I brought up Jay's name, she told the court that Jay-Z's team made discreet calls to industry insiders to blacklist anyone who spoke about Foxy. She said that I was turned into the villain for simply asking what any decent person would have asked, and then she turned to the jury. You think I lost sponsors for being messy? I lost sponsors because I was right, and they couldn't let that spread. Next came what Wendy called the part nobody wanted to believe, the part that had her labeled. Referring to the notorious freak-offs, a term that is now central to the federal indictment against Diddy, she told the court, "I was the first to say it. Those weren't parties, they were operations." She said she first heard rumors about these events in the late 90s, when Bad Boy was at its height, when phones were taken at the door, guests signed NDAs, there were candles, escorts, cameras, and people were assigned to rooms. This wasn't a house party. Rather, it was a ritual. She cited Karen Superhead Steffens, who claimed on air that Diddy had invited her. Superhead didn't lie when she asked for male involvement at one of these parties. She detailed everything, including Daisy's paranoia, his drugs, and the odd setups she claimed he was afraid she would expose him. Wendy leaned in again, and I played the interview repeatedly because the truth was too profound to ignore. She related similar stories she had heard from other guests, both men and women, who had attended Daisy's parties and returned shaken. They weren't just told what to do, what to wear, who to touch, and what room to enter. Wendy testified that she had personally spoken with 3 people who stated that IV bags were used to recover from the party, as the court indictment now explains, claimed that medical assistants were on standby, and that this was organized depravity rather than socializing. She produced a list of pseudonyms of people who had testified to her in private, and the court was shocked one by one as these events closely matched the patterns that Casey Ventura Gandil and other witnesses in the case had described. Eventually, Wendy said something that really hit everyone hard: the baby oil. I said it on air as a joke, but it wasn't funny. As the courtroom became more silent, Wendy Williams turned her attention to someone else she had been defending for years: Casey Ventura. I said it back then, and she declared, "You know why I knew? Because people told me, and I was the only one willing to say it. You were all enthralled by the diamonds, the music videos, and the red carpets, but I saw a scared girl, and I saw imbalance, so I said it on the air when Wendy testified." Wendy explained how the mogul's lifestyle and the private security industry's pull made it nearly impossible for Cassie to leave. She didn't need a boyfriend, she needed a bodyguard. She reminded the courtroom of a clip she played on her show years ago, in which Cassie looked down during an interview and flinched when Diddy raised his voice. People called it nerves. I called it trauma, but no one listened. Wendy had attempted to warn her listeners as early as 2008 about the obsessive control that Dylan allegedly had over Cassie. The prosecution then introduced a timeline of Wendy's broadcasts that mirrored Cassie's legal claims. I was informed that Wendy had access to her phones and would show up at hotels without warning, asking staff to unlock her doors. She paused, and when I said that aloud, my show sponsors pulled the plug. Wendy then brought up an incident from 2018, in which she claimed that Cassie ended the relationship with Dylan after he allegedly broke into her house. This wasn't the first time he showed up without permission. Wendy concluded this section of her testimony by saying, "Everything in that lawsuit, I saw the sign, I said it publicly, and now she's finally being heard, but at what cost?" She gave the court a terrifying breakdown of how these mogul dynamics play out: grooming, isolating, leveraging industry influence, and forcing the illusion of luxury as a means of obedience. He didn't just love Cassie, he owned her, and when she broke the chain, she became dangerous. Wendy adjusted her microphone once more, and her voice didn't tremble, but it slowed. "You don't get to talk about men like Diddy and walk away clean. I knew that, but I didn't realize how deep it would go until it happened." She testified that in 2004, when she was at the height of her radio dominance, a record label executive told her to stop talking about Puff, or else she would be pulled from her afternoon time slot. The very next week, they didn't even pretend. It wasn't about him. They said it was punishment. Diddy made strategic phone calls, she said, to label heads, promoters, and radio stations. They were warned by networks to keep their distance from Wendy. She recalled that one program director told her bluntly, "You went too far. You poked the wrong bear." She also talked about how the girl group Total nearly attacked her in front of her own studio after she called them washed up and broke on air, and you think they just showed up randomly. Wendy described the incident in vivid detail, with fans pressed against the glass of the radio station lobby, her boyfriend at the time waiting in a car, and her intern panicking. There was a message: "We can get to you." She went on to explain how she was kicked out of bet events, denied media passes, and lost an advertising deal. It was all planned, and instead of just trying to stop me, Dottie wanted to destroy me. She pulled out printed emails from PR firms that were representing Bad Boy at the time, all of them removing themselves from her platform. One of the emails said, "Per client instruction, we will no longer be booking talent on Wendy Williams' show." "That client has some combs," Wendy said, holding up the page. "I wasn't the first to be blackballed," she added. She turned to the jury once more, explaining that if you speak, you lose everything. Your mic, your money, your name. But I didn't fold. Instead, I spoke through the silence. Now, Wendy sat motionless for a moment before narrating a time that seemed almost unreal in retrospect. We come from a very homosexual era of hip-hop. She started by quoting her own words, which weren't shade but truth, and for saying them, I was burned at the stake. She explained that in the early 2000s, there was a silent but unavoidable attempt to protect certain stars by shaming those who questioned them. I had Charlemagne on. She brought up her 2004 book, The Wendy Williams Experience, which was full of coded references and veiled warnings about Dottie Jay-Z and their after-dark lifestyles. People called it gossip, but the government now calls it evidence. She then related a 2009 interview she did with former Bad Boy artist Mark Curry, who had just written Dancing with the Devil. He called Dottie the shadow that ruins people. I agreed, and then that interview abruptly vanished from the radio station's archives, she told the audience. Court that whenever she attempted to include someone who was critical of the industry's head, Gene Deal Jaguar Wright, she received pushback emails, threats, and even FCC complaints. They then tried to silence me using every means possible. Then, she revealed something that caught the court's attention, a list of people you couldn't discuss that wasn't written down, but everyone in the industry knew about it. And when I broke that rule, I paid. She explained that her Hot Topic segments were continuously flagged for review, that executives were threatening show producers, and that executives warned Wendy's voice lowered as she concluded this section, saying, "This trial is not the beginning. It's the end of a cover-up, and I want the jury to know that I've been sounding this alarm for 20 years. You all just finally heard it." As she turned back to the courtroom, her tone changed again, becoming sharper and more precise. "You think this is just about Diddy? But you're wrong," she said, locking eyes with the jury. "They said, I was going to mess it up for them for the station for myself. Includes names you weren't supposed to hear in a courtroom. Tyler Perry, Oprah Winfrey, and others. The prosecution asked her to explain, and she did so brutally clearly. There is a list in Hollywood that you won't ever see or hold, but it's real. It's the list of people you don't cross, and if you do, you disappear." Wendy described the events leading up to her controversial radio segments in which she exposed not only Diddy's parties and manipulation, but also claimed that Tyler Perry had blackballed her behind closed doors. "I had sources, producers, and agents, and they I was told unequivocally, 'Wendy, your name is being passed around. They don't want you touching certain topics. You're being labeled unstable.'" She explained that following her split with the Precious team, a movie in which both Perry and Oprah were heavily involved, her access to the industry collapsed, and I went from being invited to premieres to being removed from the guest list. One executive told me, "Oprah's people don't want you near her anymore. That's power." Then came a terrifying story in which Wendy testified that that wasn't just betrayal. That was retaliation, she continued, and the jury looked stunned as Wendy laid it bare. They smiled with him, took pictures, and stood beside him while the rest of us were getting crushed for speaking out. And I know why. Because they needed him for deals, for reach for silence. She had previously confided in private to Oprah about her own past trauma with abuse, and she assured me that she respected me and would never exploit that story. The next thing I knew, however, was that my abuser was on her show being interviewed, communication for both Perry's studio and a Bad Boy-affiliated brand. The subject line read, "Managing Optics, Wendy Puff Tyler," but that was all she needed. She stared straight ahead, realizing that these aren't just isolated stars. They're a machine that feeds on silence and destroys anyone who dares to pull back the curtain. At this point, the courtroom had become tense with every word that Wendy said, and she pulled out a thick file folder, which she said was a collection of NDA email threads and internal memos that were never supposed to be there. She explained that she didn't get them by hacking, but rather from industry friends who had long since quit the game because they were sick of seeing women go missing and sick of seeing the truth labeled as gossip. Then, Wendy started reading. From an NDA dated 2007, the name was redacted and the language was ominous. The subject agrees not to disclose any private gatherings, recordings, or interactions with shockwaves, his guests, or associates. Violating this agreement may result in financial penalties and public retaliation. She read an internal email from a chain of upscale hotels that said, "We have prepared the presidential suite with all requested amenities, including extra linens, candlelight lighting, and discretion measures. Mr. Combs' assistant will arrive for setup prior to guest entry." The date on the email was 2015, and Casey was still with Dottie. "You think this was just celebrity partying?" Wendy asked. This was a system that was planned, funded, scheduled, and cleaned up afterward. She revealed that she had evidence of payments made to publicists, talent managers, and even bloggers to manage the narrative. Reference to recent rumors and instead pushed an article on Dottie's charitable work. Then, prosecutors showed the jury a picture of Dottie, Tyler Perry, and a media consultant who is known for her crisis sweep services standing together at a 2019 gala. They were grinning, and Wendy said that while women were being paid to keep quiet and others were being destroyed for refusing to sign, she told the court that she had also been offered an NDA. They also said that if I agreed to move on from the topics I was covering, I could have a syndicated television deal. I declined, and the consequences followed. The jury was silent as when Wendy Williams reached the last part of her testimony, she didn't break or cry. Instead, she just sat with the weight of 2 decades of warning the world and being ignored. "You see Diddy on trial," she said in a calm and collected voice. "But I see something much bigger. This isn't just about what he did. It's about who let him do it." She concluded that the silence they bought cost others their freedom, peace, and truth, and now it's all falling apart one NDA at a time. "You see one man, but behind him is a legacy of silence," she said, pointing to the defense table. The tower was built on fear, NDS, power plays, party invitations, and billion-dollar handshakes. She then turned directly to the jury, and every time someone tried to speak, the tower crushed them. She reminded the court that, even though Daisy was the one who charged others, Jay-Z, Perry, and Oprah, the handlers had sat quietly for years, some of them even witnessing the abuse firsthand. They shook his hand, took his checks, and made sure anyone who asked questions was pushed out the door. "You thought I was gone. You thought your power was enough, but now you sit where the truth finally caught up to you, and I hope it's loud," before stepping down. Wendy turned back toward the gallery. "This trial is not the end. It's the beginning of people finally naming the tower one day falling down." And she walked out. "I was called bitter. I was called crazy. But I was right, and I would rather be right in hell than be silent in heaven. Silent in heaven."